It's a little bigger crowd than I expected. I will admit. And yeah, there's still a few coming. Yeah. Well, again, heartfelt welcome. I haven't shared any of my other trips. I've been on a few trips since I've been here, but there is something about a pilgrimage that requires a different kind of approach, doesn't it? And so I thought that you might be interested in them, and apparently some of you are. The effects of a pilgrimage linger in very surprising ways. If you have walked the Camino, even just a portion of one of them, would you please stand? Far back there is Father Paul. Father Jim and I walked the 2-week Portuguese one, and then the next year Father Paul walked the route that I did. And his stories just lit my heart on fire, and so I had to follow in his footsteps and a lot of other pilgrims here. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The restrooms are right through that door. Men to the right, women to the left. Just get up and stumble over people and get there. Do what needs to be done. If you have your phone and take just a moment to silence it, that would be a nice courtesy. I am happy to take questions as we go along. If I'm going to cover your topic somewhere later on in the talk, I may ask you to just be a little patient. But sometimes you're going to have a question that is very interesting, and it might be good to have a conversation about it. So just raise your hand, and we'll do our best. Okay? All right. So, the pictures on this show, I took all of them except for ones like this that have the black frame around them. If it has a black frame, I stole it off of the internet. Okay. When I was there, the whole side closest to me of the cathedral was in scaffolding. It wasn't so pretty. This was just a better picture, so I thought I'd share this one with you. All right. I took over 1,000 photos. We are not going through all of them. Each day, I would get up, clean up, eat a bite, and say my morning pilgrimage prayer. I thought it might be a nice way for us to start together with this prayer, to say it together. Now, I know that you're not on the road to Santiago. But life is a pilgrimage, and so if we looked upon the pilgrimage thing as a metaphor for life, and Santiago as whatever moment of reunion with God that we could be aiming for, we can say this together about life, can we not? Okay. So let's pray together. Oh God, all deserving Abraham from birth watching over him all his wanderings, and guided the Hebrew people as they crossed the desert. Guard this child of yours, who for love of your name makes a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. Be my companion on the way, my guide at the crossroads, my strength in weariness, my protection in danger, my stability in the rain and mud, my shelter on the path, my shade in the heat, my light in darkness, my comfort in discouragement, and the firmness of my intentions. Through your guidance, may I arrive safely at the end of my journey, and enriched with grace and virtue, return to my home, filled with lasting joy. Grant me, O Lord, my God, a mind to know you, a heart to seek you, love to be like you, wisdom to find you, conduct pleasing to you, faithful perseverance in waiting for you, and a hope of finally embracing you. Amen. Love that prayer. It was the starting prompt of my day, and
it was great to return to it as I was walking. Just out of personal curiosity, a few questions I have for you. Was there anybody in the room who was following along on Facebook while I was... Okay, quite a number. All right. Are there people here who are curious because they're thinking of taking the Camino themselves? Okay, so there's quite a few. All right, so you might have some particular questions. Do we have many here who are not parishioners of Padre Sarah? Quite a few. Heartfelt welcome to you, wherever you're coming from. It's lovely that you're here. Okay. Most people, when they walk the Camino, they walk the French route. And how many people saw the way? Okay. Martin Sheen's character was on the way. It's this yellow line down here. And it starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and heads all the way to Santiago. That was not the route I was on. When Father Jim and I did the Camino together, we started here. I think I can maybe even have an arrow. Can you see that little arrow? Right there. I started at Porto and walked up with him. But this time, I started here. The border of France is right there. And I walked here and then down this other route, which is called the Primitivo. That was the route that I took. Okay. For the most part, a pilgrimage these days starts with a plane flight. And then a bus or a train trip to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, or wherever your starting point is. Then you take 30 to 40 days of walking, including with the arrival at Santiago. In medieval times, what did you have to do? You opened the door of your house. Very frequently, you would go to your parish priest, and he would write out some form of credential saying that he recognized that you were really, truly a pilgrim from his parish, and that would be your credential as you walked along and went on your way. You picked up your pack and you started walking from your front door. You may have had to sail if you were starting in Great Britain. Many people in old days would have ridden horseback, and depending on your station in life, you could afford a horse. I did meet one couple, and the two of them had walked the Portuguese route, starting the same place I did, in the same year that I had. They fell in love with it, as happens. And they made the decision that they were going to walk the whole way from home. So he started in Vienna. Yeah, by the time, he was skinny. She had to fit the whole thing in. They timed it so that they would be in Santiago in time for her to get home. She was a school teacher, and so school didn't get out until he was in Switzerland. She flew straight to Switzerland and met him there. And then they walked together to Santiago. And then as soon as she got there, she had to fly back because the school year was starting again at the other end of the summer. Because they really walked a long distance. They were on the third pair of hiking boots by the time I met them. So they did the medieval thing, except that they flew home. In the medieval world, you had to go home. So you have the trip there, and then you have the trip back. My own Camino really began when I made the commitment to go on this. And I made the decision about 2 years before, and then I began to really walk seriously, starting in the December before, when I got a Fitbit. And so I walked, over Ventura along the beach, Santa Rosa Valley, Hill Canyon Park, you know where that is, and Santa Monica Mountains, Sycamore Canyon. If you're a hiker, that's just so beautiful. And right down here, right down the Arroyo Callejas here, my Fitbit said that I walked about 2,400 miles. Now, that's over the course of the whole series of months, which would have taken me to Savannah, Georgia. So I didn't actually walk to Savannah, Georgia, but I walked that distance, in preparation to ready myself. I walked 2,400 miles to prepare for 600. On July 19th, I set out from the parish for Spain. I can remember it very well because I was with couples on retreat, and On July 19th, I set out from here. I was with the couples retreat. I had promised Deacon Jack Redmond, if he buttonholes you in a corner, run. But I came back here and I stamped my credential. This is what the modern one looks like, okay? Whenever you stop at a restaurant or a hotel or a church, they stamp this credential for you. And so here's Padre Sarah, Camarillo, California, July 19th. So if any of you are going to go on your own Camino, come here first. And I will stamp it here as the starting place of your Camino, okay? Because it always begins from home, all right? So July 19th was when I started. You'll notice the next date is August 19th because I took a whole month to study Spanish. So just to be clear, I didn't head straight there. Oh, no, I can use this, and this is one. Okay, because when I first went, I stayed in Salamanca for 2 weeks to study Spanish. And then from there, I went to Barcelona for 2 weeks to study Spanish. The Archdiocese paid for that. That was really kind of nice. They want us to know Spanish, all right? And then I took the train up to Irun, which is right on the border with France, preparing to walk over here to Santiago, which is right there. Just as a side note, after I was done with the whole thing, I went over to Mallorca. And the reason why I went to Mallorca was that was where Rosa was born, except he was Jose before he got his religious name. Yeah. So, but that didn't happen until later. It was still part of a pilgrimage in a sense. It just wasn't the one to Santiago. All right. So I started up on the border there. All right. What happened was I was in Irun, and there was a river running through town, and France was on the other side of the river. And I thought, I'm here, I should have dinner in France. That really was my thought. It was about a 3-mile walk to the river, the Bilbao, and then I had to walk another mile to get into the town of Hendaya. And I got there about 5 and nothing was open. I was too early. Because everyone there, they eat late, you know. Actually, the places were just closing as I walked in, because they had finishing lunch at 5. All right. And so I went to the bay and found out that there was a church there, and went in, and they were going to have Mass at 5:30. So I thought, I'll go to Mass at 5:30. So this bridge, this is the sign on one side of the bridge, the Pont Saint-Jacques, the bridge of St. James over the Bilbao, and then on the other side of the, oops, did I go the wrong way? There we go. On the other side, it's the Puente de Santiago. So here I am on the border with France, and the bridge is named the Bridge of Santiago because when they first built the bridges, it was to help the pilgrims hundreds of years ago, because this bridge is a replacement of a bridge, which is the replacement of a bridge that was first put in hundreds of years ago for pilgrims heading on their way to Santiago. So that's how old this thing is. The landmarks are named for people on this pilgrimage. There was the little church. I went to Mass, and it was absolutely lovely. I don't speak any French, but you know, you can more or less figure out where you are, even if you don't know the language. I mean, we've been to Mass enough. I can say. And then afterwards, I happened to have my credential in my pocket, and I took it to the back, and that's where I got the second stamp. I'll just turn it upside down there. Yeah, the parish of Our Lady of Bilbao, in the Diocese of Bayonne in France. And so 1 month to a date after I left from here, on September 19th, on August 19th, I got, July 19th, excuse me, thank you. Yeah, that didn't sound right. On August 19th, I got my stamp at that church in France and began my pilgrimage. Now, if it seems odd to walk 4 miles to get dinner and then 4 miles back, when you're preparing to walk 16 to 18 miles a day, walking 8 miles to get to dinner, it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. After you've walked 18 miles, you don't want to walk 8. I'll tell you that. Okay. So, where do most people stay? They stay in albergues. It's a hostel, but in Spanish the word is albergue. And when you have anywhere between 4 to 100 people sleeping in a room together, sharing accommodations, and it has its ups and its downsides, I would just say. What are the ups? There are some real blessings, so take this seriously. You get to know your companions very well. And as a result, people start forming little communities. In the movie The Way, they started traveling along together after a while, after they kind of worked out their rough edges and fought out their little battles. They become what they call a Camino Family, all right? And they travel together, they go to restaurants or cook meals together, they share the stories of their lives, their hopes and their dreams, sometimes their losses, as was the case in The Way. And for many, that companionship becomes the biggest grace of the whole thing. You know? You can see how that could happen. You end up in conversations with strangers, and because they're strangers and they're not going home with you, you can tell them the truth and there's no price to pay. You know? And so what happens is you start telling them the truth about your life, and you start grappling with the issues as they say, you're a little low today, what's going on? Tell me your story, you know. And then you end up telling them your story. And then you become best friends, and because you are best friends, they do end up going home with you in a way, you know. So it's a lovely kind of a trap that happens. As you can imagine, there are also a downside to sleeping in these albergues. There's the snoring, apparently. Some people are nuclear powered. You find humanity everywhere. Possessions do get stolen. Apparently there is a fight between Northern and Southern Europeans as to whether or not the windows at night should be open. Because one group will open them, and then the next group in anger will shut them, and then they'll have a little fracas there. There are pilgrims who do come in late, you know, after everyone is sleeping, and there are others who get up very, very, very early because they want an early start, and they rattle around in the packet when you're trying to sleep. Back when I was in high school, I did the high school seminary my junior and senior years, and it was me and 19 other guys in a very big room. There are wonderful things to learn about being in a communal sleeping area like this. I think I learned them as a junior and senior in high school, and I made the decision not to do this. And so I get my community here. So I usually stayed in very simple hotels or rural homes, 2-star, 3-star. Some of them, most of them were 2-star, because I was looking for something different than that communal family thing. Like I said, for some, that was the thing that was so rich for them, joining a communal family and journeying along together and opening up their lives together. That was not the thing for me. As you go along, you follow these yellow arrows. I think this was the very first yellow arrow, flecha amarilla, that I followed on my way. At the beginning of each day, I took a picture of the first one that I saw as I traveled. There are way too many to see them all here. But I usually wake up at about 6:30 to have my bite to eat and get on my way after my prayers. I was usually alone for several hours because Spaniards are not early risers. And so when I first began, it was broad daylight at 7:30 when I was, but on my last week it was pitch black outside at 7:30. When you're gone for 6 weeks, things can change. As I walked along, with some frequency, you come to chapels and churches, anywhere between 2 and 5 a day, depending on whether you were in a really rural place. Although there were some chapels out in the farmland, and almost every chapel or church where I passed was locked. On that first trip with Father Jim, we had to laugh because the Church of St. Benedict at the open door was locked. And part of it is they have very old statues that can be hundreds of years old. And if they don't have someone there to maintain security, those things have a way of walking and finding their way into museums. So they literally have to. It tells me something about not what to do at Padre Serra, we will have no precious small statues that people can walk away with. There'll have to be 2-ton things like our beloved Mary in there. You know. Okay, but I would come to a little church or a little chapel, and I'd sit down and take off my pack, and I'd get on my phone because I had asked you before I went for your prayers. Do you remember that? I had well over 600 prayers. And so, you know, I come to a place like this, and I pray for a mother who yearned for a better relationship with her son, a son in prison that he might have a drug-free future, for a mother's concern for the spiritual welfare of her son and daughters-in-law, for a couple moving toward retirement who hope to have lots of time with each other as friends and lovers, and for a parishioner who needed strength and courage from God to deal with back pain. You know, I'd say 4 or 5 of my prayers, I put my pack back on, and off I go. I can't walk through everything with you, so we're going to do a lot of skipping, but I thought I'd take you through some of the highlights. In the first 4 weeks, I got to be along the coast. Now, it wasn't every day. Sometimes I would be right on the coast, like the one on the right. Sometimes the coast would be off in the distance, and sometimes you couldn't see it at all because the trail went away from it. But the treasure of those first 4 weeks was seeing me like this. From the beginning, I planned to take rest days every week or so. So I found it was necessary. I'm 59, I was 58 at the time, and the 20 to 30-year-olds, they didn't stop. They did the whole thing within 32, 33 days, something like that. I took 42 because I would take my rest stops in. This is the city here of Bilbao, and it was just a treasure to have the day. I was walking down the hill and I found Mass was going on. It was Sunday morning, and I got to go to Mass right there. And then they were having this fair. I never figured out what the fair was about. I asked the people at the hotel, and I said, it's a festival. Anyway, but they had these people underneath these tall, gigantic figures, and they dance around, you know. And I saw these at museums elsewhere in Spain, so this is apparently a common thing. And they had a band playing in the square of the city. It was a rainy day, but along the river, it was a beautiful city. I did see the Guggenheim Museum the next day. Do you recognize the architecture?
Yes.
This is our own Gary, who did the Disney down in Los Angeles. All kinds of modern art. This one is a huge spider. Can you see the little people? These are little people down there. This is a huge spider. The artist said he was thinking of his mother. He had issues. But you know, you go to someone else's country and you find that they're both similar and dissimilar, and the art still speaks to you and catches your attention, and the architecture as well. Because when I came to a big city, I would stop and I would see the cathedral and I would see the various different sites. But I thought that was part of the experience. I can't go to someone else's country and not eat their food and see their sites and kind of enter in and figure out who they are from the things that they have around us. In Bilbao, their cathedral was named Santiago. For whatever reason, on this route, there were very few churches or chapels dedicated to Santiago. But this one was one, and it was a favorite of mine because it came so quickly on the pilgrimage. And while I was there, I prayed for 4 sons that their hearts would be turned toward God, for the healing of a knee, for a husband who has unknown needs, for a brother in hospice care. Again, I get on my phone and pray for the next thing. Now, in Spain, they have provinces like we have states here in the U.S. I walked through all the northern provinces. Euskadi?
Guipúzcoa.
Say it again for me.
Guipúzcoa.
Which is the Basque province right up against France. Actually, the Basque territory goes right on into France. I have a Basque expert right here. The rest of them I can say. Cantabria was next, Asturias was next, and Galicia. So I ended up walking through 4 of their provinces. This is called Green Spain, and you can see why right there. So this is not the Spain of the olive trees or the wheat or sunflower fields or the orange orchards. That's southern Spain. The hills here are sometimes wild, but they're more often dairies and fields with apple orchards and cornfields and relentlessly green. And the sky is often kind of foggy or cloudy, kind of like Ireland. It's actually heading in that direction as you're moving through northern Spain. I was traveling in the dry season, August and September. Dry season there doesn't mean what dry season means here, where we have 9 months where there is no rain. There it just means it rains less, okay? So even if it wasn't raining during the day, sometimes it would rain during the night. It was always great to be at my destination when the rain came down. 3 times, though, it just poured on me while I was walking, which made the trails and the roads really muddy. You can see this one. I'm actually up a cliff, taking a picture down in the trail I'm supposed to be walking on. But it has been, there's just no way to walk on some of them. It got very difficult. I used to take my turns when I figured out how bad it could be on the very rainy days, walking on the roads. That had its own difficulties. But these farm roads were for farmers and their animals. So you can imagine there's a fair share of manure along with, I never fell, but that was the one place where, I thought that I was at risk. But on a rainy, stormy day, is there anything more spectacular than the ocean? I love being on the ocean on those days. Because the waves would be magnificent. They come crashing on the rocks. You can really sense God's majesty when you're at the ocean. I came to this very beautiful church, Santa Maria Asunta, in Castro Urdiales, on a very rainy day. They had begun building this church in the 13th century. It puts our Mission San Buenaventura into context, doesn't it? What was I doing? I was praying for someone's friend who's fighting for her life, trying to beat cancer. For parishioners at a crossroads with their business, needing to make some important decisions. For a husband who was drifting away from the faith. For a wife and adult children who had lost the faith. For a woman who was receiving chemo, and for her husband who was walking with her through that very hard process. These are the stuff of life that I got to pray for. Most of the days, you would start somewhere at a little town on a bay. So you'd finish your day walking down into that little bay, because that's where all of the fishing villages were built. And so the day would start the next day, always with almost straight uphill. Yeah. The Northern Camino was, from the very beginning, a difficult one for a lot of people, especially in the ancient world. You had people who were malnourished. Now do I look malnourished? So I didn't have that problem. But you had to be ready every day to start your day going almost straight uphill out of one of these little bay towns. Absolutely lovely, because it was a little bit of a surprise on the Portuguese route when I was on it with Father Jim. Most of the roads were called the Camino de Santiago in Portugal, or the Camino in Spain. It was the defining thing, and many of the chapels and churches were named after Santiago. But on this one, the focus wasn't on us, because in Europe, most of the people in Northern Europe go to the beaches of southern Spain to get away from the cold. Because the beaches in the south of Spain are warm and lovely, But the Spaniards, they all go north to the northern coast where it's cool and fresh to get away from the heat of Madrid and the south of Spain. So most of the hotels and restaurants, they weren't focused on the pilgrims wandering through, because our numbers weren't as big as on Camino Frances. Most of their attention was on the Spanish tourists who were there. And the lovely thing is, you walk along this bay, and you have all these people out on the sand and in the water, and you have 3 generations. You have grandpa and grandma out in the water playing with their grandkids. and you had mom and dad back at the beach having a nice moment by themselves. So almost every evening was a little bit of a party. It was kind of a nice, refreshing thing for the end of the day.
How was the breakfast?
How was breakfast? Breakfast, I was used to, remember, Spaniards don't get up early. I had breakfast by myself, usually, and I'd ask for it the night before, because they would happily make breakfast for me at 8 or 9. And I wanted to be on the road at 7:30. I had my plan, that'll make it nauseous. My plan was to follow most of the Spanish eating customs. Now, they would get up late. That was when I did not follow. But their lunch, our lunch is their dinner. And as usual, it's late. So lunch in Spain is usually somewhere between 1 and 4. Okay? So if I got up and was on the road by 7:30, I could get to the next place, get a shower, wash my clothes, and go and have a beautiful, big Spanish meal. And because it was their big meal of the day, it was where they put all of their attention. They're puzzled by American tourists who come in at 6 o'clock and want to have dinner. Because between that 4 o'clock time and the 9 o'clock time when they start serving again, all the restaurants, all the workers, they go home. So they don't know what to do with American tourists. So I surrendered to their way, and I got the menu del dia, the menu of the day, and every day it was this beautiful meal. So these would be all the people there at the beach and having a great time, and they set up cabanas, and it was, like I said, it was a party every time that I was there, and beautiful towns right on the bays, and surfers just outside of Santander, wearing their wetsuits because the water there is every bit as refreshing as it is here. Campers, you didn't see many people camping, and then beautiful bays with boats in them. It was just really a total treat to be there. Okay, so the last picture that I took on the coast right there. All right, so why are there different routes? Well, in the 7th century, Islam burst out of Saudi Arabia and fought its way across northern Africa and up into Spain, and they conquered everything except the very furthest northern. Let me see here. Let me do this. Yeah, this area right here was the only place that was not conquered in any kind of formal way. The Basques held on to at least a significant amount of their territory, and a little principality of Asturias. And so when the bones get discovered here in the 9th century, the only way to get there, if you're not going to walk in Islamic territory, is along the coast. So that was where the northern route came from. And it wasn't really initially formally a route. You simply took whatever means you could to get to the next place, and people would make recommendations about where the best food could be had and whatnot. So you ended up following the recommendations of the people in the towns that you were with. So in the earliest years, you simply traveled from town to town. As the kingdoms of northern Spain expanded southward, which they did almost immediately, the Moors pushed away all the way up, and then the Spaniards began a very long fight from the 1492 was when they finally drove the Moors out of Spain. Same year that Columbus comes here. By the 11th century, because the Northern Camino that Father Paul and I walked was so mountainous, the kings of King Sancho the Great, I think that might mean fat, and Alfonso VI, they moved the Camino southward to the current place. So that northern route that I was on and Father Paul was on, too mountainous, and they moved it down here. There are mountains at the very beginning over here, and there's a mountain here that everyone on the Camino Frances really, really dreads because it's a very tough day. But every day is tough here in an exciting and beautiful way. All right. So they moved it south for a reason, to make it easier for travelers as they were coming through. In the Middle Ages, the numbers of pilgrims really took off. 500,000 people at any given point in the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th century. 500,000 people at any given point were on the road to or from Santiago all by itself. Now, other things like this were happening in Rome. A part of the thing that drove them this way was in the 700s, Jerusalem fell to Islam, and it was closed off as a place of pilgrimage. That was the first heart of Christians in the first century, was to go to Jerusalem and to see the sites where Jesus was. And after they couldn't get to where Jesus was, they went to where his apostles went. All right, and so Rome was a very, very big one. I'll return to that in just a little bit. Anyway. The local authorities began to build bridges where there weren't any, and churches and chapels, which were marked right from the beginning. You see that shell there, which is the emblem for people who are pilgrims. They let you know that this was the place where pilgrims were welcome. This here is the Monastery of Zenaruta. And for over 1,200 years, this monastery has been welcoming pilgrims up to today. Yeah. And so, in my first week, I came to this monastery on August 25th and went into their very beautiful chapel. There was a woman singing nicely, so it was fine. And, so I prayed for a woman's adult children, that they recognized God's loving presence in their lives, and for a parishioner who wanted God's help making decisions so that she could choose love over fear every day, and for a daughter who was getting married, and for a couple who were getting divorced, that their hearts would be open to the healing love of God, and for a husband who had health issues, and for patience and a reflective spirit to consider how the petitioner's actions might affect others. Very beautiful prayers. Okay? So carrying on from here, where am I? Can you tell? If you had to guess, if you didn't know you were at a Camino de Santiago pilgrimage, would you have guessed Ireland for this picture? Yeah. I think this is it's a little bit faded out. But I think this is my favorite picture of all of the ones that I took here. Absolutely splendid days along the coast there. I did walk over all different kinds of paths. At its best, like this, it was dry. It was walking through the wilds, but they were often wet. I don't know if you can see in this one. That's pretty muddy there. More often, it was going through pasture land than farms, than wildlands, though. But the pastures were so beautiful. In some of the mountain areas, you ended up going through pine forests, but they were overwhelmingly farming the pines for the wood for paper, I believe. On the way to some of the most ancient towns, especially in the Basque country, you had to walk on cobblestones. Very hard to walk on for any length of time, but when it was rainy and muddy, you loved it. Okay, remember that muddy path? This is a huge step up from that, okay? I would just say. These were put in the 15th century for pilgrims. Yeah. And I noted that the path in the Basque country always went straight down the hill and straight up, because Basques are tough. Am I right? Yeah. On a couple of occasions, I had to take a ferry into San Sebastian and into Santander. I have the greatest story about going into Santander. I'm sorry I don't remember the woman's name. She had been trying to find the ferry when she was walking on her way. I listened to this on the podcast. She was heading to this ferry landing where this boat took off from here. And she had kind of lost her way. And I know why, because the arrows, they disappeared on that side of the bay. And she saw a guy ahead of her, and he had a backpack on, and on his backpack was the shell of the pilgrim. And so she said, he looks like he knows where he's going, because he was striding right along, And so she began to follow him, and by golly, he led her right to where she wanted to go. And she was so excited, because if you have to walk around the south end of the bay there, it adds about 5 hours to your day. So she was excited to get to the right place. Anyway, a couple of minutes later, this woman walks up and says, "Listen, thank you. I had lost my way, and I've been following you because you looked like you knew where you were going." She was following someone else who looked like he knew where he was going. Who knows who he was following? Yeah. So, the path, you can tell that they have adapted it over time. I had an app on my phone, and it had the route that was set at the time that the app was made, and it had a little dot that showed where I was on that. And I noted that on occasion, their little brown line that I was supposed to be on was different from the official route, because they had changed it since the app had been made. They're constantly trying to find a nice way that pilgrims can go safely, which means they try to keep you off roads, because there are times when, these were both the route at one particular point, and when it rained, I would get on the roads to stay out of the mud. They did everything they could to keep you off the roads, because it was generally more beautiful out in the countryside. It's easier to walk on hard-packed path than it is on asphalt, and especially when you're walking long distances. To stay off asphalt is an advantage. Every now and then they couldn't help it, because the only way to get to a bridge that you needed to get across the river was to be on a road, or because it rained, or because the farmers wouldn't let you cross their trail. Okay? But they were constantly looking for better ways and updating it. So, I did end up on the roads a few times. When they first began to do the pilgrimage, you had to board the rivers and the streams. Eventually, they did have ferries like the ones I was on, and they had bridges. I don't know if you get that one. It's kind of hard to see. That one on the right, beautiful old. They call it the Roman bridge, but it was built in the 1400s, so there were no Romans involved in it. But this one here was probably in the 12th century. This little rock bridge here. That was put up so that pilgrims could get through, and the local farmers. It's not all about us. There we go. The road would inevitably take you through some town, and here was, my hotel room was right across from this beautiful church here in Deceleration, the Church of El Salvador. And in Spain, unlike here, the daily mass normally was at either 7 or 7:30 at night. The Spaniards don't get up early. So, and it was perfect, because I would, I'd have that big meal, starting anywhere between 2 and 4 o'clock. And by 5 o'clock I would go back. I would spend a little time jotting down my thoughts for the day. If there was Wi-Fi, I might post something on Facebook. Some of you got a chance to see some of those Facebook posts. And then, getting to be 6:30, 6:40, depending on where I was in relationship to the church, I would head over to the church and go to Mass. It would be in Spanish. It's interesting going to Mass in Spain. That the priests have a very flat affect. You meet them before and afterwards. They're absolutely lovely people. But they have this very flat affect at Mass. So it was interesting going to Mass, because there was kind of nothing between here and there. But you have those, you see why they had to lock the churches, because those shrines there in the back, they were all gold leaf from probably gold that came from Mexico. Anyway, absolutely splendidly beautiful. And while I was here at the Church of El Salvador, I prayed for a husband, his acceptance and peace and courage for his struggle with Parkinson's. I prayed for a daughter, for several daughters, that they might find good men to share their lives with and find their way back to the Lord. For a friend who was diagnosed with cancer. For a son in his 50s who needed to find a job. For a dying husband, that he be open to all of heaven's graces. As I went on my way, we followed these arrows. Now I want you to notice, do you see the scallop shell, how it's pointing to the left? And how that scallop shell is pointing to the right? In the different provinces of Spain, the shell points in the opposite direction. In this province here, all of the shells pointed with their rays pointing towards Santiago. All right. In that one there, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was. It might have been Asturias, I think. The rays brought you together as though all the various different roads were gathering at Santiago in the absolute opposite way. And you had to know where you were and what system that they were using, because sometimes that's all you got. And you had to know, does that mean right or left? And it depended on which province you were. So if there were arrows, follow the arrows. If there were shells, know where you are, because it would be different from one place to the next. Okay? So here I am, just outside the little town of La Casquita, and the trail split. If you remember, there's a Primitivo that headed down towards Santiago, and it began in Oviedo. So if you're going to take the Primitivo off of the north, you have to go left here, I happen to know. And then if you're going to stay on the north, you headed up to Gijón. So know where you are and what you're doing. Every now and then, you got more arrows than you knew what to do with. And in these moments, I would pull out my phone and look at the app. On 3 occasions, I found myself wandering around and thought, where was the last arrow? You know? I'd look at the app and I'd be way off. I was off by an hour. It was a shorter day, so it didn't turn out to be too bad. But you had to pay attention, and you'd be walking along, and it would be beautiful, and you'd be concentrating on the beauty, and then you'd be led into some thoughts about things, and you next thing you know is you hadn't paid attention. Well, at least that's what happened to me. Luckily, not too often. After a few weeks, I found that the mountains they were really daunting at the beginning. When I first went into Bilbao, I was whipped. That was at the end of 6 days of walking, and I was whipped. But after a few weeks of walking, the mountains, they just didn't bother me at all. I would walk right up. At the top, I would keep right on going, and no need for a stop. That was nice to have hit my stride there. But one of the most important bits of advice that they give on the Camino forums is to walk your own Camino, by which I mean, number 1, don't walk at someone else's faster pace. I met this lovely Spanish father and his daughter, and they were only going to walk 2 weeks. They loved talking with me. They would come up and they could talk very, very, very fast. And so I had to spend, that whole month learning Spanish was only so that I could understand that man when he was talking excitedly about, whatever it was that our subject was. And they would walk for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours with me, and I could almost hardly wait for them to walk on. And it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying them, although it was really kind of a Spanish test. But they walked so fast. And eventually I just had to say, I'm not going to walk your speed, so I'd love to talk to you, but you have to walk my speed. And you just have to be real firm about that. And then number 2, don't be competitive. And sometimes the competition is with yourself. Because Spaniards get up late, I would be on the Camino for hours, and I would get passed by the very same people day after day. Somewhere around 11 or 12. And I learned to smile and greet them, and they very congenially smiled and greeted me back and then walked on, okay? And you can't let your ego get involved in this thing, because if you do, you're trashing your own experience. So don't be competitive. Number 3, this is really critical. Listen to your body if you're going to do this Camino. Do you need to stop for a little rest? Well, stop. Are you a bit thirsty? Well, be sure you're carrying water and drinking it. Are you getting too much sun? You got to keep the sunblock handy. Are you dry from the rain? How are the knees and the hips doing? All of this matters. And number 4, and it needs to be repeated twice. Be kind to your feet. Be kind to your feet. I saw people with spectacular blisters. Spectacular. 2 young men who had to throw their Camino into the wind because their feet were so damaged by their inattentiveness to their feet that they had to stop walking. So anyway, you need to do what you can to keep your feet dry if it's possible, to have really good socks. There's a theory about having 2 socks. I just had 1 pair of great socks. If you feel a little burn in your feet, you have to stop and put a little of that moleskin on. You don't hesitate. You just do it really, really quickly. I've never spent so much money on shoes in my life. It was 3 pairs before I was done. Can you see that? Okay. In the middle of my Camino, I made my way past 2 spectacular ancient sites that Father Paul told me about in advance, and I am so glad that I stopped. I first went to the cave of Altamira in Santiago del Mar, and they had these incredible 15,000-year-old paintings on the cave. Yes, 15,000-year-old. Just a few days later, I came to the Tito Bustillo cave in Rio de Sella, and there was the doors that would let them in, and this is their photo of the trail. You couldn't take pictures in this one, but you went way back into the caves where you were able to see that. And it's a bit uncertain, anywhere between 10 and 20,000 years old, the paintings there. Yeah. And the thing that was so marvelous is here we are, tens of thousands of years later, and we're still concerned about beauty, aren't we? You know, to have that touchstone with people from tens of thousands of years ago who were taking the memorable moments of their life and their hunt and their way of living and marking cave walls with beautiful paintings. So anyway, I was incredibly impressed by the human spirit when I considered what they were doing so many thousands of years ago. On my way to these ancient sites, I was in the port city of Santander, and I tried to get into the cathedral, but there was a wedding, and so I was sent to the basement. This is the basement. Not too bad. So anyway, while I was there, I prayed for an adult son who was consumed by depression, and for a mother who was overwhelmed and saddened and drained by her children, for a parishioner who needed healing from a childhood trauma from a father, for a friend who had stage 4 cancer, and for a premature baby who was still in the hospital for extended care. The question you ask yourself, why want this? Why want this? For some, especially in the medieval world, it was an act of atonement. Either a penance for sin given by a priest for something that was really seriously wrong. Sometimes people were sentenced by their local government to have to walk the pilgrimage. So this was a significant part of some people's motives in the medieval world. But for some it was to fulfill a promise, perhaps in the spirit of thanksgiving for a blessing received. People are always making bargains with God, I notice. So if you'll do blank, then I'll make a pilgrimage to blank. That kind of a thing. Theologically and perhaps spiritually more correct would be as an act of thanks for blessings that people had received in life. Nowadays, it's very often to mark some important transition in life. So, whereas the ancient cultures, they were more deliberate about marking the key moments, allowing for celebration or grieving, as needed. In our rush to move on, sometimes we shortchange ourselves. So what ends up happening is people end up on the Camino acknowledging that their world had changed, marking the death of a spouse, of a child, or some significant other, marking adulthood and the gap here between education and taking a job. A lot of people marking their retirement from work, or the change of career, or the place of employment. Fair number dealing with divorce. Some parents who at last, their last offspring had moved off and they had a little space. For some it was a response to having been overwhelmed by life, a way to grapple with mental illness, a way to resolve relationship crises, a way to commit oneself to sobriety, either from alcohol or drugs, a way to face grief head on and to choose to live. For some, it was a time to reevaluate life. You actually have space and time. You can grapple with an issue until you're tired of it. You can put it away for several days and then come back to it, grapple with it again, and put it again away for several days. Because the Camino gave you time and space to actually do that. So, pilgrimage gives us the chance to ask what career or vocation is right. What do I need to leave behind to live an unencumbered life? And that's a huge one. What values do I want to live by day? For some, it's a petitionary cry to God. We've been invited by God to ask, seek, or knock for one's health, or someone else's, for the conception of a child, for the great good, whatever that is. In every age, the Camino is for people, like myself, seeking a deeper spiritual experience, such as these other pilgrims who had joined me for Mass. And here's where I learned that the priests were really lovely. This was the first town that had a Camino blessing. If you go on the Camino Frances, almost from start to finish, they have blessings for the pilgrims in the local churches there. On the northern, they didn't do that until this little town here. And it was I was already on the Primitivo when it happened, and after Mass, the other Mass, the priest invited us all up. He had been very, that reserved thing all the way through Mass. He invited us up, and all of a sudden he became this lovely person. Where are you from? You were in Barcelona. How is your family? Because they just had that huge, terrible thing in Barcelona. How's your family? Is everyone safe? Lovely, lovely guy. So these are pilgrims who just happened to be in this town at the same time I was. I never saw any of these people anywhere else. But they were having Mass together. And, in every age, it should be added that there are young people who are doing it just for adventure. And that's good enough, isn't it? I think adventure would be good enough. I certainly had a wonderful adventure. I'm not going to take that from anybody else. One of the elements of this is it touches people so much that many people end up doing it more than once because the opportunity to go back and to continue to deal with it, whatever it is the issues of life are. I was listening to an excellent study by Katharina Husman and Gianna Eckhart there from Royal Holloway University in London. And they studied why the Camino is becoming so popular in people's minds and hearts and with people who have done it. And their key word was deceleration. Our world is moving so fast, And so they had 3 different ways that you decelerate on the Camino that are really impactful in people's lives. One is the body deceleration, slowing down, walking slowly through a country as opposed to racing through on a car or a railroad or flying over it on a plane. So just the slowness of the pace. Then there's the episodic deceleration, they call it that. That's simply engaging in less stuff. You're simply moving from this place to that place. You wash your clothes, you get a bite to eat. And that's what you do. You wash your clothes and you get a bite to eat and you walk to the next place. That's the story. And so all of a sudden, you don't have all of these things preoccupying you. And then the last one is the technology deceleration. Almost everyone uses technology less while they're on the Camino. I found for myself, I didn't know when I got abandoned by all my friends. I told you that. Father Jim wanted to walk a few weeks with me, then he got that job at Loyola and backed out of it. My brother Teddy wanted to walk 1 or 2 weeks if he could pull it off, and then his mother-in-law came down with dementia at a very fast pace, and he had to back out of it. And my classmate, Father Ed Dover, was going to walk with me into Santiago in the last week, and he has diabetes, and his doctor said, those feet, you're not walking anywhere. So they all backed out of me, so I began to line up music and podcasts so I could fill in the empty space, and I never listened to them. The thing that was a little scary when I was thinking about it from the front end ended up being this huge grace, walking silently through and slowly, well, not too slowly, I was moving along, but whenever you're walking, it's slower than any other kind of travel you've ever done. And it became just this spectacular grace for me. And my main interest was spiritual. And I say spiritual in that authentically Catholic sense. People are now saying spiritual, not religious. Spiritual is an incredibly religious word. We've been using it for 2,000 years. I'm not going to let go of it. But in the silence of my days, I chose to walk with God. And that was why I had that prayer. And I crafted that prayer a little bit because when I found that the rain was dangerous to me, I recrafted it. I added that line, be my stability in the rain and the mud. I shared the beauty of the countryside with God, and I thanked Him. I revisited the troubled events of my own past life with God, and He told me that He loved me, and I heard it. I prayed for your intentions each day, and I believe He heard me because a lot of those intentions have been answered. I shared the silence with God, and He walked with me in the quiet. In essence, I created space for God, and He filled it. So, if I was to say the greatest gift for me, that would be that God filled the space that I gave Him. A secondary gift of the Camino for me, and it's kind of ironic because never have I been involved with such strenuous things day after day after day And yet it was restful. It was restful. For 6 glorious weeks, I was only answerable for myself. When was the last time in your life that has been true? You know? So it was restful to all of the responsibilities to be gone. So that was the secondary gift. As you travel along the way, they have little things to just kind of lift your spirits as you go along. So we, you come across these Parque del Peregrino, pilgrim parks every now and then, and they have a nice place right on the path, so you can stop and have a bite if you had a picnic or something. That pillar there was in the front of a mansion in some little lost space, and it said, "Traveling pilgrim, this is the way that leads to the field of stars where the apostle rests." It says that in Latin. It was a little bit beyond my Latin. I had to get a Google Translate. But the one on the right, nada más pido. I ask for nothing more. El cielo sobre mí, the sky over me, y el camino bajo mis pies, and the camino under my feet. That one, I particularly treasure the spirit of that one. But you have these little memorials or statues along the way just to kind of cheer you up and keep you going. The food. I found the food of Spain wonderful. And it changed from one region to the next. The Basque region, the Basques are crazy about their food. The first city I walked into, San Sebastian, it's not a big city, it's a city, but it's a little city, has more 3-star Michelin-rated restaurants than Paris. Only Tokyo had more than San Sebastian. But how do you call it? Donostia in Basque. And I spent a day there just eating my way through town. Amazing food. This was Basque food here on the left. But every now and then I would come to a place and they'd have all these open stalls. And you just get a little bite here and a little bite there. And you make yourself a little picnic. And if you're lucky, they'll have a bar. I don't know what that drink was, but it had a little... it was kind of a Negroni. It was just delicious. And I was sitting there on the bank of a river. And you would make a picnic for yourself. The food was amazing. And the pattern was for them, you had a big meal there in the late afternoon. And then after Mass, in the evening, you go out and you get a glass of wine and a tapa. And you'd have that at one place, and you'd pick up whichever one of the tapas they have out there on the bar that you like. And then you would leave that bar and you'd go on to the next place. If you were a Spaniard, you were traveling to see friends from the various different places, so you were moving around seeing your friends. It was a party every night in the towns where the tapas were. And then you'd go to bed. So it was a lovely day for food, and it was fresh and it was seasonal. They don't do, those tomatoes that have no flavor. Have you ever had a green melon here that you wanted to eat a second time? They're kind of risky, those green melons here. There they were always delicious. Because it was just their green melon season. And so they don't ship them from great distances. It would be something grown locally and prepared locally and eaten locally. And they're not like the Mexicans who have really spicy food. Their sauces were not quite as picoso. They didn't bite quite so much. I like Mexican food very much, but I enjoyed Spain. It was a completely different food than what we're familiar with. Okay.
Talk about your lodging.
I will get to lodging in just a second. It's not coming very far. In most of Spain, in the medieval world, you drank normally beer. You could not drink the water unless you had springs. I'll talk about, we have some springs here in just a little bit. So fermented drinks were important because in that fermentation process, the diseases were killed and you didn't die as a result. So you either drank beer or wine. And in much of southern Spain, wine is the thing. In a large part of northern Spain, though, where it was cold, the apples were so crisp and delicious, and they made cider. I did not like it. It didn't have the slightest hint of sweetness to it, the ones that I tasted. Did you ever have any? She didn't like it either. Okay, we're aligned on that one. Okay. But you go to a sidreria. Did I say that right? I think I did Deceleration. And you see, he's pouring it from way up high, because if you pour it up high, apparently it gives it a little bubble, a bubbliness that they are fond with. Myself, the wine in Spain is cheap and delicious. And if you got the menu del dia, they would bring you your first plate, and they had the most beautiful beans, and I'm saying the same thing with beans. Delicious, huge, these gargantuan beans in this very savory broth, and then they'd have your main course, and it was fish or chicken very, very frequently, and then they would have a little dessert, which I usually have fish, and I would sit down, and they would bring a bottle of wine, and they would plop it there, and the bottle was already open, and it was part of the menu del dia, which was about 15 euros, 15 in the cities, 10 in the towns. At that point, the dollar was really, really gangbuster. So 10 euros was about $12 for an incredible 3-course meal with a whole bottle of wine. Not too bad. Water was always a concern. So I had my pack on. But I'm going to just read a little bit to you from a travel guide from the 12th century. Okay, from this one. It's called the Codex Calixtinus, and it's falsely attributed. We won't need to go into that. But from the 12th century, it reads, "At a place called Lorca to the east flows the river known as the Rio Salada, salt stream. Be careful not to drink it, or water your horse there, because the river is lethal. As we were going to Santiago, on its banks we found 2 of the local Navarrese sitting there, sharpening their knives. When we asked if the water was safe to drink, they lied and said that it was. So we watered our horses, and 2 died at once, which the men then skinned. At Estella runs the river Ega, with sweet, safe, and excellent water." I mean, this is the kind of advice you needed in the ancient world. So, what do they have now? They have these little springs. And so these springs are natural springs that they have enclosed to make it just a little bit more sanitary. And the water's pouring out. This was, if you were going to drink water, the only water you could drink in the medieval world had been filtered by the ground. Okay? And if they found that it was a safe source, they would build one of these things. Was it safe? Who knows? I never knew. So I was ready for my backpack. But I did see other people drinking from them, and they seemed fine. That's all I did. All right. So, in the last 2 weeks, I leave the Northern Camino, and I start heading down to Oviedo, which is where the Primitivo begins. And Primitivo does not mean primitive in Spanish, it means original. Because way back in the early middle 800s, the bones of Santiago are found in Compostela, in the Field of Stars, and King Alphonse the Chaste of Asturias, I wonder what the rest of the kings of Asturias were like, if he's called the Chaste. He journeyed from Oviedo to Santiago to see if he could validate the claims being made there. So he established the original route, the Primitivo, and so that was the route, in imitation of Father Paul in the background, that I decided I was going to follow myself. So it's a 1,200-year-old route. And as I was walking, I began to get heel problems. I have high arches, and so I get plantar fasciitis. And when I walked between that first 2-week Camino, every step, I was aware of every step. I had more or less recovered, but I began to see the problem developing again as I was walking into Oviedo. And luckily, Oviedo is a big city, and I went from shoe store to shoe store trying to find shoes that would fit. And I ended up going to their Corte de Inglés. It's kind of like their make company, their Broadway, something like that. A little high end. And the guy there, he's trying to make me happy, and I'm unhappy. And he says, "You wait here," and he goes into the back, and he disappears for 15 minutes. And I'm thinking, he's hoping that gringo just keeps on moving. He comes out, and he says, "I found it." And he comes out with these blue shoes. I'm sorry it's not as bright as it was, because they're electric blue. And I try them on, and they're perfect. They're absolutely wonderful. They were $200. I say, I hate the color, and he says, tough. Says, you Americans have big feet. These will do. You know. I had been wearing I had two pairs of shoes that I was alternating before up to this point, and I'd worn them out because while I was doing that month of study in Spain, I started to wear them because you don't want to wear new shoes on this kind of a thing. But I apparently had worn them. I started too soon, and they were getting done. So the last 2 weeks, I just had this one pair here. And curiously, Mark and Kathy Milner had given me a backpack, and it was the same electric blue. So I had an electric blue backpack and matching shoes. It looked a little precious, you know? This is a picture of, it might have been the most beautiful cathedral up to this point in Oviedo. I went to confession with some regularity. There were just things to revisit in life and to say, I'd really like to let go of this. And the priest there was so wonderful because my Spanish, they say you speak very good Spanish, and I said, no, I speak like a little boy, shortly. My pronunciation is better than my grip of the grammar. Anyway, they were always very, very sweet to me. And this one here, finding out that I was on the Camino says, and that I always said that I was a priest. It's so good to me. He says, listen, you've got to celebrate today because we are going to show the mantle of Jesus. If you remember from John's Gospel, the beloved disciple races ahead and gets to the cave first, and then Peter comes along and Peter enters first and he sees the cloth folded up by the side, the head cloth folded up by the side. Well, they believe they have the head cloth of Jesus here in the Cathedral of Oviedo. And so he invited me, he almost insisted that I come back and celebrate. Up to this point, I had been to Mass almost every day, but I hadn't celebrated Mass. So here was the first place that I actually celebrated, and it was just this really lovely experience meeting these priests. And this is one of the 2 days in the year that they brought the mantle out and showed it to everybody, and you could go up and reverence it. It was really incredibly moving. And while I was there, I prayed for a mom and her 2 small boys who suffered from Lyme disease, and for the conversion of a husband's mind and heart, for the successful diagnosis and cure of a cerebral infection, and for the spouse who stood by to care, for a 2-month-old grandson suffering from cystic fibrosis, and for grown children's growth and faith and closeness to God. They had a party in Oviedo to celebrate the beginning of autumn. The party began at 11 at night. I was very happy my hotel room was on the opposite side from the cathedral square from the party. Because as I was leaving the next morning at 7:30 a.m., there were still people who had not gone home. The Spaniards take their partying seriously. Yeah. On the Camino, I saw a fair number of sheep. I only saw 1 pig, lots of cows. The farms there are small. They're not the big farms that we have here. And they look like they have to be run by a family. They don't have imported labor or anything like that. And these farms were developed before there was mechanization. The orchards were small. They looked like just big enough for a family to harvest themselves, But what I noticed is that there were no young people except in the dairies. The dairies could support a young family, but the other farms were too small to be able to do that. But just before I left, I was reading this curious little statistic that more people in the United States were killed by cows than sharks. Does she look friendly to you? This is in Grandes de Salime, this little store. Most of the stores are like our little 7-Elevens. Most of the they call them supermercados, but they were not supermarkets. They were just little tiny things. Most of you got your own things. At this particular one, you would ask them and they would get it for you. When I go into a store here, I want to be left alone until I need some help. You know what I mean? when they come and say, can I help you? But no, you can't. Give me a little space, In Spain, if you walk into someone's store, the polite thing is to say buenos dias or buenas tardes, to say good morning or say good afternoon. If you don't do that, you're a rude American. Yeah, we don't know. You don't know when you're being rude on their terms. If you do that little gracious thing, and it's the same thing in the restaurants, by the way. You greet the waiter. You greet the person who is seating you. And that establishes a little bit of a rapport. And then you can treat them like this. They were smiling this week everywhere I went. Once I figured that out. You learn their pattern and you go along with their pattern. And it was just lovely. I got the loveliest service in restaurants and in stores everywhere I went. Once I figured out their way of being polite. Because they think Americans are rude. Because we don't know how polite means in their country. Are we rude? We're not rude. I don't think we're rude. But you just have to know. It comes to hotels. Most of the hotels I stayed in were dull, affordable, clean, and private. That's all I wanted. Most of them were very, very tiny. Have you ever been to a Hotel Ibis in France? You know how tiny it is? Okay, most of them across the board were tiny. I had a little company, Follow the Camino, based in Ireland, and they will set up all your little hotels for you. And they ask you, what do you want? Do you want to be in the countryside? Do you want to be in the city? Do you want to be in the old part of the city? And that's what I wanted, because the church was there. That meant I could get to Mass. And so they set it up for me, and so they identified all the places. There were some places where there were no towns, and so like this place, this was a rural house that I stayed in. Little tiny room, big beautiful house. I stayed here just after I left Bilbao. I had a balcony looking out over this beautiful inlet. This might have been my favorite place. A beautiful room. I was kind of surprised that I could afford it on the salary and paying those people. But I did stay in this great little place here in Comillas. The water fixtures were original. It was an interesting experience. I did stay in one castle. A spectacular place. I was in the servants' quarters. I just know it. Most of the rest of them were fine and forgettable. Okay? So, but I wasn't there to be at a luxury resort, and so I just did not care. The only place that I stayed at that was really nice was at the very, very end. This is the great big cathedral of Santiago is over here, and so that's just on the other side of the square. And it was built to be a hospital for pilgrims. But it has been renovated by the government of Spain. It is the Parador of the Three Kings. Absolutely splendid. The only place I stayed in that was nice was at the very, very, very end. You travel along in someone else's country and you come to the beautiful city of Poo. Which I'm not sure how they would have pronounced it. In Spain it's probably Pol, or it might be just Pol, but it might be Pol, which does not mean what it means in English. I'm just going to say. Or the Bilbao bus. That was actually a Bilbao bus. Actually a bus stop. You go to other places and you come across interesting names. And you go through these great old towns here, and you see the tile roofs. You know where our tile roofs come from. We were California here. We were settled by people from Spain. These homes here are all older than the Mission in by hundreds of years. They're older than the Mission, which is our oldest building in this county. As I traveled along, though, at a certain point, they stopped having the tile roofs that we're familiar with. And I saw it on the hillsides first, because as I was hiking through the mountains, all of a sudden this black slate began to show up in the hillsides. And so they began to use slate on the tops of the roofs. It looked like Ireland again. This curious crossover of cultures. The slate roofs were black, where they weren't green from the moisture and the rain. Day after day after day. There was one very long slog into Oviedo through an industrial thing. But then you got to that beautiful cathedral that you you forgot about the rest of it. There were a couple places like this that you had to get used to. But even there were little graces. As I was coming into Oviedo, there was this little shrine, and there's Santiago himself. And so I took, in the midst of the drizzle, the opportunity to pray there for a brand new baby granddaughter, that she might know the faith, and for a daughter with a third bout of cancer, this time stage 4, it did not look good. For 3 sons, that they might recognize God's voice and walk in His ways. For a brother in hospice care whose muscles were deteriorating. For a son whose depression was consuming him, and for his mother who was overwhelmed with sadness. As I walked along, and I would say these prayers as I would come to a shrine like this. During the first month, I never met an American once. This would not be the Camino Frances, lots of Americans. I did meet one native English speaker. She was Canadian. Delightful. I ran into her a couple of times, and then again in Santiago. That was really a grace to meet up with her. I did speak English with that Austrian couple, and the rest of the time was all in Spanish. I was glad I had my month. But I met these lovely people on the way. I never encountered them in town, but this was a group of people. They asked me if I would take their picture, because by this point we were kind of social friends. They would pass me every day. Really, really, truly lovely people. Then I met this group of Americans, and they're from the Pacific Northwest. I think it's Oregon. And he, on the left, was an adventure planner. And he had retired, and they had set up their date and made their plans, and then he needed back surgery. Yeah. They decided to go in the way they shortened it. They didn't do the whole 6 weeks. They just did the primitivo. And he couldn't walk uphill. It killed him. So they would take taxis uphill, and they would walk down. And I love that they did it. Someone somewhere is poo-pooing that they took those taxis, and I'm thinking they did the Camino that was possible, and I love that they were there. That was my theory. All these white badges that she has, she cares for cancer patients, and so those were the names of people that she had worked for who had died, or the family members who had loved them, and so she was carrying them, on her pilgrimage to Santiago. I started encountering them with some frequency, and with lovely people, you can kind of tell. And then I met Chip and Loris, and they live in Ojai. And we became a group. We didn't travel along, but we would end up walking into the same restaurants night after night, because it's a little town, they didn't have many restaurants. Or we'd be looking for a tapa at the same time and a glass of wine, and end up at the same place. And so this happened enough. You'd stop for a little cafe along the way, and there they'd be. And so we became our own little traveling companions a bit, and that was lovely. It's nice to speak English. I'll just say. While I traveled along, I started in August, and in August Spain was green, unendingly green. But I traveled all the way through September and into October, and things began to turn a little golden in some fields, and the corn in this field had been harvested. It was still largely green, but you could tell that the seasons were changing, and that was beautiful. Like I say, it rained on me 3 days. The weather was generally nice, though. In the high 60s or the 70s, almost the entire time. I think I might have had 3 days in the 80s in that whole time period. But as I got closer to October, get a little bit of a chill in the air, especially at night. You could tell that winter was coming. In the last few days of the Camino, the Caminos began to overlap with one another. So I'm very fond of saying, we did not join the Camino Frances. We were the original route, the Primitivo. The Camino Frances, which had hundreds and thousands of people on it, joined us. And all of a sudden, there was an unending stream of pilgrims. It was kind of a little bit more of a Camino party than the reflective Northern Camino. Father Paul, I remember you saying that it kind of changed the nature of the whole Camino to join there. And I knew exactly what you meant after I got there. It was a different kind of spirit. It was good. I did meet some pilgrims who were doing the last 100 kilometers in wheelchairs. God bless them. And I met an Anglican priest, a woman, She looked at Padre Sarah on her little phone, and she couldn't believe how different church life was in her little parish with Padre Sarah. But I ended up encountering all kinds of people here in these last days. On my second to last day, for whatever reason, it was only 8 miles. And I'd been walking 16 to 18 for the most part, most of the days. It was only 8 miles. And so I walked right past my hotel and kept on walking until I was looking out over the city of Santiago. I came to this little tiny chapel of St. Vincent's where I'm here. It's a rainy day, so my path is covered with, to keep it from getting wet. And they had a table set up, and you could stamp your own sello, your own stamp onto your credential. And I thought, well, you notice I didn't have a lot of pictures of myself. I'm not a big selfie kicker. But I thought I'd ask the woman behind if she would just take my picture, because I thought, this is probably my last stamp on the way. They'll give me a stamp at the end, but this is my last stamp on the way. And so she got a picture of me, stamping my own credential. And I went to the front of the chapel and sat down and completely surprised myself by bursting into tears. It was just so... And these weren't sad tears. They weren't joyful either. It was just that it had been so significant and so wonderful to have been walking all of this time. Anyway, my body was telling me it was time to quit. My left knee, I could make it work, but it was telling me, time to stop, Anyway, so I took the taxi back to my hotel, had dinner, and the next morning got in the taxi and drove back to this chapel, got out, and walked the rest of the way into the city. So, these are about, I guess, 9. I'm bad on things like this, 9 to 12 feet tall. So they're very, very tall, beautiful statues of pilgrims looking out over Santiago in the distance. It's a foggy day, which was not unusual. But I was excited, and walked into the city and into the cathedral square, left my things at that beautiful hotel, the Parador, and went to Mass and celebrated. I was the only native English speaker, so they had me do one of the prayers of the faithful in English. It's kind of hard to see, but in front of the altar is a great big, huge incense thermal. Can you see it? Huge. Look it up, Google it. Camino Santiago and incense. That's all you have to do. And it comes up. And they sweeten. This is a huge cathedral, and it has this transept, these side aisles, and it just swings from the roof all the way down, the floor up to the roof. Absolutely spectacular. Look at it, Google it, and you can see it. So after Mass, I made my way down to the sepulchre where they have the remains of St. James. And while I was there, I prayed for a 95-year-old mother who was suffering from dementia, who has subsequently gone home to God. For a husband, that he might find peace with his family and his work. For someone seeking to use her talents to serve God and succeed in a new business. For a woman with both pancreatic cancer and multiple compression fractures in her back. And for hopes for a new beginning with a family. So here I am at the tomb of St. James. It's somewhere between 818 and 842, Bishop Theodemar of Iria discovered the lost tomb of the Apostle James. So how do you get from James to Santiago? Well, in Hebrew, the name is Yaakov. In Greek, it's Iago, which is a lot closer to the Spanish than James is. The hard one to explain is James, because Jacob is actually the name. So, in English, Saint plus James, in Spanish is Sant Iago, Jacob. Okay, so their name is actually the reasonable, correct one. Where James comes from, you'll have to ask someone else. But anyway, he finds these remains here in Spain. St. James was the brother of John, James and John, the companions of Jesus. Peter, James, and John were there with Jesus all over the place, at the cure of Peter's mother-in-law, the transfiguration, at the Garden of Gethsemane. James and John want to be on the right and left hand of Jesus when he comes into his glory. Jesus gives them a nickname. He's kind of fond of them. He calls them Boanerges, sons of thunder. because they were fiery. They had a lot of spit and vinegar. But some 10 years after the crucifixion, Santiago was put to death. We read in Acts 12:1. About that time, King Herod Agrippa laid hands upon some members of the church to harm them. He had James, the brother of John, killed by the sword. And when he saw that this was pleasing to the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. It was the feast of unleavened bread. So James was the first of the apostles to be martyred. He was martyred in Israel. Okay? So how do his bones end up in Spain? There are all kinds of stories to explain how the bones got there. Do I believe any of them? No. My suspicion is that he was the only apostle in the 7th or 8th century AD who didn't have some place claiming his bones. Okay? Saints Peter, Judas, Simon the Zealot, and Thaddeus are all believed to be buried in St. Peter's in Rome. Okay? St. Philip's and St. James the Less are buried in Rome also, but in the Church of the 12 Apostles. So a whole raft of apostles are in Rome. Andrew's remains are shared between Amalfi and Petros. They divided them up and split them. It's done both ways. John's tomb is in Ephesus. Thomas's tomb is in Mylapore, India. Bartholomew is in Aladam, Armenia. Matthew's tomb is in Salerno, Italy, and Matthias, the apostle who was added to replace Judas Iscariot. There are two places claiming him, Trier in Germany and Gonio Asparos in Georgia. So all of the others were claimed by a place except for James. Does it seem convenient to you? Do I care? Not a bit. No. And for two reasons. It's as good a place to celebrate Santiago as anywhere else on earth, you know? And he was one of Jesus' closest friends. And while doing pilgrimage to his grave, I got to ask myself, how good a friend am I, to Jesus? So he becomes a wonderful jumping-off point for considerations at a spiritual level. And the second thing is that here in Galicia, we're only 50 miles from what in Spain they call Finisterre, the end of the world, as they understood it. There, out of the far edge of Spain, was as far away as you could get in their world from Jesus, who had commanded the apostles in Acts 1:8, "You will receive power from the Holy Spirit who will come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the world." When he had said this, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him from their sight. So this was the last command that he gives them, to proclaim the faith to the end of the world. And for them, Santiago was the end of their world, And whether James is there or not, the faith got there. So was the command to the apostles fulfilled? Yes. So this is as good a way to celebrate, the realization of that command given to the very, very early church. St. James, I have a few different depictions. Almost all of them have a scallop shell. Frequently he's got a book because the Epistle of James is attributed to him. A walking staff, a gourd for water. These are the common symbols of St. James because to get to Spain he had to have been a pilgrim himself. Modern pilgrims look something like this. Okay. So, statistics. As I said earlier, in the Middle Ages, up to 500,000 people at any point going to Santiago or coming home, 500,000. So it was bigger then than it is now, is my point. In the Reformation, it dropped off. It never died out altogether, but it did drop off. 30 years ago, in 1987, there were about 3,000 pilgrims in total. 20 years ago, that had multiplied 8 times to 25,000. 10 years ago, that had multiplied another 4 times to 114,000. And in 2017, when I traveled, there were 301,000 pilgrims. The number is again jumping up exponentially. We haven't quite reached the medieval numbers, but it's heading that direction, and it looks like we will. The stats for 2017 weren't altogether ready, but in 2016, about 52% of the pilgrims were men and 48 women. So it was a pretty even split. And of them, 91% walked, like myself. 8% did the bicycle, and that's a legitimate way of doing it. 342 individuals came by horse. I did see one family, a French family. They were very antisocial. I couldn't get them into any conversation. They were a family, a husband, a wife, and a baby with a donkey. But they were young. There were 125 people who did at least the last 100 kilometers by wheelchair, and 15 came by boat, probably either from Ireland or Great Britain. Of them, overwhelmingly people had religious reasons. 40% did it for purely religious reasons, 44%, so just under half. 48% for both religious and cultural reasons. Only 8% had no religious motivation of any kind. So it's still done for a religious reason. The 8% who are doing it for adventure, I get it. If you have someone who wants to do it for adventure, send them. It's a wonderful thing to do, even for just that. In terms of ages, and this, I note that this is a room that has a few people who've had a few years under the belt. 27% were under 30. And you always knew them because they passed you by. The majority, 55% of the pilgrims were between 30 and 60. Wow. Okay? And 18% were over 60. I met people in their 70s, and they were moving along. There was this couple, he would walk ahead, and then he would wait for his wife, and then he'd walk ahead and wait for his wife. They did this day after day after day. It was their pattern. And it's no surprise that most of them, am I on the right page? Yes, Spanish, okay. Yeah, 45% were Spanish, not a surprise. Unemployment among young Spaniards is somewhere around 32%, if I'm not mistaken. So this was an inexpensive way to do something meaningful, while you were waiting for a job to come along. 9% were Italians, it's not very far for them. 8% were Germans, and 5% were from the USA. So 15,000 Americans. Very frequently, I noted with the Europeans that they would do it in stages. So one summer they would do a week or two, and the next summer they would do a week or two. And so they would do the Camino over the course of several years. Only 281 people in 2016 started in Hendaya, where I started. Many people, about 18,000, followed the same route, at least a portion of it. About 37% of people who do the Camino in a given year only do the last 100 kilometers. So a very large number of people do the last 100 kilometers. And I shouldn't say only do the last 100 kilometers. That's about 60 miles. And to do 60-mile walk anywhere is a worthwhile thing. So I do not want to poo-poo it. If the only thing you can do is the last 100 kilometers, there's a number of places you start from depending on the route you want to go to. Lugo on the Primitivo. Forgetting the other names, but in any case, if you walk 100 kilometers, the Cathedral of Santiago considers you a pilgrim in good standing. Okay, and it's a wonderful, worthy thing to do. So you don't have to do what I did, because we had some people here who did the 100 kilometers right over here the same year that I did. Was it not a wonderful experience? Yeah. So they're shaking their head yes. So it's not just me. All right. In terms of, it doesn't matter. 63% did the Camino Frances that Mark Sheen did in the way. That's the big one. 63% did that one. 18% walked the Portuguese route, and only 6% walked the Norte and 4 on the Primitivo. So it was I was on one of the least traveled routes, and for me that was the joy of it. All right. I get to Santiago. I had a lovely time there. After all of the simple little hotels, this one was really splendid. I don't know how many days of stays at other places were paid for by staying here just one day, but it was very luxurious. And after the simplicity of everything else, it was a crazy splurge, and I loved every moment. I did go back to pray at the shrine because I was so close. It was right across the plaza. So I went back to the shrine many times. In fact, I started at the beginning. I did prayed all 600 of your prayers. It took a little bit of time. But I decided, you asked me to pray for them. I prayed for them right there at the tomb. there was this odd arrow. When you leave the cathedral and go out to the right, there was my hotel, and then there was this road that went down and left the plaza, and this arrow, can you see this faintly there? It was pointing away from the cathedral. Pretty much straight west. And it might have been the continuation for people who were going to go to Finisterre to the end of the world. It might have been that one. I don't know. It was unexplained. No one, I didn't get any explanation on it. But there is a saying that the Camino actually begins when you're done. Because the Camino's about living. You know, being in Santiago was wonderful. I loved it. But if the Camino doesn't in some way prompt you about the rest of life, you know, there was a missed opportunity there. And so here was this arrow pointing west, pointing home. You know, I wasn't going to go straight home after I left there, but I loved that this arrow was there. Here we are. We are in Camarillo, 7,575 miles from Jerusalem, much further than Santiago de Compostela. And the Commission of the Apostles is still happening. Still happening. The faith is still being proclaimed in the farthest corners. Hawaii is further away than we are, and there are places in South America that are further away, but I will tell you, if you go to Hawaii, the closest way to Santiago is to go in the opposite direction. So this is about as far away as you can go on this line. Bilbo Baggins. You know Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit? He has his little poem. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead, the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then, I cannot say. If you've got an itch, get up and go, but I'm happy to stay for questions if you have some. Yes?
Have you been able to hold on to the feelings and the lessons learned? You know, you get back into regular life and it starts to fade away. Have you been able to hold on to it?
Great question. Have I been able to hold on to, the reflections and the gains from the trip? I have to be conscious to do it, but I can. I altered my morning prayer for the Camino to a morning prayer for life here. It's a similar prayer, but it's changed from my ministry as opposed to my life as a pilgrim. Ever since those daily prayers, those repeated prayers for the parishioners, they got into my bones. And so whenever anyone asks me to pray for them, I tell them, you have to send me a text or an email, and I will put it on my daily list and I will pray for them. So I'm still praying for parishioners the same way as them. Putting this together, I didn't have a chance. I wish I could have done this sooner, but I was just completely impacted from November until just maybe 3 weeks ago. So I started putting this together about 3 weeks ago because that was the first chance, open weeks I've had. As soon as I got back into the pictures and things, it lit my heart on fire again. Yeah, I'm actually planning in 2 years to maybe do a pilgrimage to Rome, something similar. Yeah.
So you still have the blue shoes?
I still have the blue shoes. I can't wear them anymore because I wore them out. The heels are gouged in the bottom. But yeah, I feel they're kind of like a memento.
Yeah, they've been to
Yeah, they've been to Santiago with me. I feel like they're friends.
Yeah. Publish your reflections.
I'm sorry, I did not.
Publish your reflections.
Am I going to publish my reflections? I have a company, Ave Maria Press, that wants me to write a book. But where am I going to get the time? So it's a lovely idea, but I'm not sure. Get a ghost.
I just want to know, you said you want to start with the stamps. And if they're not Catholic...
The stamps, how to get them? You can get them from any store. You can get them from any restaurant. All the hotels have them. Everybody in Spain, on any one of the routes, knows what this thing is. So all you have to do is show them your credential. And so you can be doing it purely for adventure. and you get your stamps, and you go to the cathedral and you get a credential at the end. You know, I don't know if you remember, I heard you back here, in all of December, my office was a total wreck because the bathroom overflowed. And they cleaned out my office, and when they put everything back in, the credential never made its way back into it. Oh, excuse me. The credential was stamped, and I have that. I have the stamp. I don't have the beautiful paper that they gave me in the cathedral. The stamp thing was more important to me somehow. I carried it with me every day in a plastic bag to keep it dry, you know. It was my companion every day, every moment, you know. So yeah, and I go back and I can remember the places that I stayed. So, but you can get them at any hotel, so you don't even have to be religious to get that filled out. And the cathedral doesn't care. They will give you their beautiful one for free at the end. $5 for the container that it goes in. It's like the Getty, free to enter after $15 for parking. Yeah. A little up. Were there any miracles attributed to that cathedral? Apparently, in every age. Yes. Yes.
Did you use your phone cameras, or did you have, or for pictures, or did you have a camera?
Phone. Yeah, did I use my phone or camera? I used the phone for everything. Yeah, no, there are companies that will move your bags from place to place. And I had luggage from that month of study. And I had that moved. But I was carrying in my backpack what I was using from day to day. And I did not want the weight of a camera. And I had, you know, those Columbia pens that have all those pockets, those cargo pockets, you know. That's what I had. And so I had my passport, I had my credential, get it stamped, I had my phone, I had medical supplies, you know. So you had to be weight conscious. How do you get water? The water in Spain is very, very safe if you get it from the faucet. It's not like Mexico where you stand a risk, you know, depending on where you are. I never got a bug anywhere in the 2 months that I was in Spain. So the water was safe. I filled it up at the hotel before I left. And I figured by the length of the day and the expected temperature how much I was going to need, 2 liters or 4.
Well, I was just going to say, when you're talking about the water coming out of the fountain, I drink water from the fountain constantly. If it wasn't drinkable, it said non-potable.
Okay.
But I filled my water bottles constantly from the fountain. It was so good.
And you walked for 4 weeks, didn't you?
Yeah, I walked for 4 weeks. I did 300 miles.
Yeah, she did 300 miles, and she always drank from the springs, and some of them were listed as non-potable. None of ours ever said anything, potable or unpotable.
Well, if
And so,
didn't say it, it was okay.
if they didn't say it was okay, I'm glad it all worked out. What else? Yes, Michael.
Did you see any serious wild animals?
Wild animals, it was almost eerie how few. I saw one small weasel kind of thing. I was walking by a chicken coop, and there were 3 dogs who barked at me like crazy. Apparently the weasel was going after the chickens or the eggs. And so they had 3 guard dogs there. It was the only place I ever saw a wildlife of any kind other than birds. Never a squirrel. Never a rabbit. Here in, you know, the Canego Mountain looked down upon us, and rabbits in my backyard eating everything that I plant. Never saw a rabbit ever. Never saw a deer. They eat them. That was my theory. They eat them. Yes.
Did you ever feel unsafe? You were alone most of the time.
Did I ever feel unsafe? I was alone the entire time, and the only time I felt unsafe was when it was slippery. Never from people. Ever.
Did you ever hear of anyone being attacked out there?
Did I ever hear of anyone being attacked? No. There is a forum, it's called the Camino Forum, and they have people reporting in all the time about their experiences, and very regularly people who are intending to go will ask, I'm a single woman, is it safe for me? And then you will have 40 women who say, I did it by myself and I never felt it. Okay? And once a year, something will come out that someone had an unpleasant experience. It almost never happens. People do have health crises. People are more likely to die of a heart attack or something like that than anything else. Of course, I'm a big person, and I'm a guy, and I never felt remotely a vision.
Somebody wants to know, because I did the Francis alone, and I was never, ever felt unsafe.
Francis alone, 300 miles, and never felt unsafe. So there's a witness for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. He had to have been, St. James, if he evangelized, he did it within the first 10 years after the death of Jesus, because he was dead 10 years after Jesus. I don't think he did. I don't think he went, but there are theories. Yes, that's what I think. Yeah. Okay, have a good night all.